Hello, welcome to another episode of Creating Cultures That Outperform. We're moving on to episode 13 of our series on how to lead from anywhere. We have an important one today, something most people don't think about, especially for knowledge work, which is tuning the work environment so that you can have people who are creative and solving problems instead of distracted. So we're going to get right into it. I'm Frank Wander, founder of People Productive and Boardroom Edge, and Terry Mays, certified culture engineer. All right, so let's go, Tara.
Yeah.
So remember, as a leader, you've got to worry about these things. These are the things that drive the productivity of the workforce, and the work environment really matters. People don't think about it. They get caught up in the tasks and activities and the other, processes and practices they need to follow. But you need to optimize the work environment to support optimal performance. And so we're going to cover 5 things that you should think about, talk about with your people, and see if there are ways for you to actually do them better. So here's a big one: think time. Protecting our creative space. You can't capture all the creative thought unless you have think time. You've got to have think time blocked on the calendars so that people can actually really sit back. It's that old story that the most valuable person in the company is the one whose feet are kicked up on the desk, really thinking about the bigger issues and not constantly caught up in the flow of work. But, Tara, what have you seen in this area?
Yeah, this is so important where you have time where you can really shut out all the distractions and focus in on creativity. You cannot be creative in a space where there's a lot of distractions, a lot of things happening. In this world, it's kind of hard to get away from all the distractions, but you really do need that time where you can kind of shut out what's going on around you and really deeply think about the problem you're trying to solve, a solution, a more creative way to do things. All of that and having those ideas come when you have that dedicated think time, where you have those blocks of time where you're just literally sitting there thinking about it, trying to figure out how can we best solve the problem.
Yeah, and I think you nail it, Tara. It's about solve the problem. So, part of generating value out of this is to actually challenge people to go solve things. That
Right,
you've got to give them the challenge. And then you've got to give them think time so they can really spend time thinking about it. And then you got to capture the value out of that. And so there's a
right.
whole process. We did we did a whole series on innovation and how do you innovate in a company. And go back and look at that series. This is an important element. But think time, you're never going to capture or you generate a lot of creativity unless those sparks of ideas have time to bubble to the surface. And that's what think time is. You can capture them. Because if you're really running and gunning and working all day, none of that's coming to the conscious mind because it's busy. The conscious is busy. It's blocking it out. So this is very important. Another thing, can you get your people in a state of flow? And so we're going to talk about, which is different than, it's different than think time. Think time is really focusing on kind of the creative aspects of the job. This is being able to be a super worker, getting into that state of flow. Chichimitsa, I always get that guy's name wrong, but he studied this deeply. There's tons of research papers out there on this. And to get into a state of flow, you need just the right amount of sound in the background. You need just the right amount of challenge. And you need that uninterrupted time to really begin to focus. And so you could design this in and make it a goal of the organization that people will be able to get into a state of flow. You'll no doubt pair this with interruption-free time, which we're going to talk about. But Tara?
Yeah. This is again one of those things that's critical for innovation. And we're talking about leading from anywhere. So, your people may be anywhere, but they still need to have these dedicated think times, these times that are designed for them to get into the deep thought and get into that space of flow where they're really intentional about how they're working, they're intentional about what they're thinking about, they're focused in the moment, and they're trying again to solve the problem. So even though your people are spread out all over the place, they may be working from home or working in an office space, wherever they are, you still need to allow for this type creativity to happen in the organization. And as a leader, you have to direct it. You really do have to make sure that people understand how important it is and give them the space to do it.
Yeah, I remember getting into flow on the train going into New York City in the morning because I had all my email was done. I was working on my book, and I was in an environment where it was very comfortable. There was just the right amount of background noise, and I would be just super productive. I'd be typing away, and maybe 15 minutes later, you'd pop out of it. And so you get into this state of flow where everything behind you recedes into the background, and you're just in that moment in that work, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
When things start to click
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, I got it. I know what I need to do next. I know how this needs to proceed. And you can start to put some of that stuff down on paper and really flesh out the details. It's a really exhilarating feeling when you get to that space of flow.
Yeah. And it happens in sports, it happens in knowledge work, happens in a bunch of things. But you got to challenge your people to get into this because this exists. It's real. People who are in this are 5 times more productive than they are when they're not in a state of flow. So this is huge. Honor the no interrupt zone. We're in this world of constant interruptions. I think this is really big. We protect each other's focus time, knowing that uninterrupted stretches are essential for deep progress and high quality work. Yeah, that's what this is. You got to protect this time and set it aside, and everybody's got to respect it. And that's why
Yeah.
there's on the door, please come back later. This is his time to basically do work and not be interrupted.
Yeah, you've got to respect that. And it's so hard, when you've got this virtual environment that we work in, it's hard to respect that, right? So you don't necessarily see the sign on the door, or you don't see that the person has their headphones on and they're trying to get into this state of flow. So even all the more when you're in this remote workforce, you've got people kind of virtually all over the place. You really do have to set some boundaries. And when you see people, their team's light is showing that they're busy, respect that. Don't necessarily just go ahead and send them messages. Don't overlook that. When their calendars show that they're busy, respect that, because you never know if that person has blocked off time because they need some uninterrupted time to focus on something. So don't just stomp all over people's calendars and continue to bombard them with messages when you see that they're busy. Ask, what would be a better time for me to approach, or just wait for their busy time to be over and then approach. So there's a lot of ways that we can, as coworkers, respect each other's times, so that now it becomes more of the norm where you see, oh, that person is busy. I'm not going to disturb them right now.
Right. And, when we've rolled this out and deployed it, there's two types of interruption-free time, and Terry's hitting on a very important one, which is I need a little more interruption-free time. I'm putting on my calendar. The other one is we all agree that, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 3 to 4, it's interruption-free time. And we all respect it. And there's rules and guidelines around what's a true emergency where you can interrupt somebody. But, both of those, whether it's organization wide or on an individual basis, you've got to respect people's time to do intense blocks of work, because that removes all the stress. They get so much work done in a short period of time. It's a huge stress reliever because they got a lot done. They have the feeling of accomplishment, and anything you could do in your organization to schedule that. That's why you need a culture engineer like Terry to come in and set these procedures up org wide, because these things matter. I mean, you can get half the work done for the day in an hour and a half if you're not interrupted and you really get into the zone of just grinding it out.
Right.
Work-life balance. You've got to have time to recharge, and you've got to build this into the schedule. I remember we would get so much more work done if at the end of a sprint we all took a break before we got into the next sprint, and that was recharge time to unclutter your mind, for everything to get pushed down into whatever part of memory it needs to go in. I know I rolled out basically a buy, what we called it a buy day, 2 companies where you were 9 on, 1 off. And boy, did that make a difference, having that extra day where people could take care of all their personal stuff, go to the dentist, get to see the teacher, maybe visit the doctor. Something's bothering them, they got to take care of it. They get it done on that day. The other 9 days, they're at work. They're not preoccupied thinking about, oh God, I told my son I would get in and talk to his teacher. No, you've got a place to put that. You can compartmentalize everything. So this is a big deal, whether you do it just as time to discharge, recharge after a project, or you're building it into the schedule, which I would recommend. I've always found that works best. But Tara, have
Yeah.
you found the same, right?
Our brains are a supercomputer.
Mhm.
And just like any other device, you have to have time for maintenance. And
Yeah,
that's
great.
probably the best way to think about recharge is you have to have downtime for maintenance. Every good software engineer knows that you have to have downtime so that you can do maintenance on your software. And that's essentially what you're doing when you recharge. You
Yep.
take that time where you're focusing on refreshing yourself, you're relaxing, you're getting to that place where you're comfortable. I love the plant and the yoga mat here, but
Yeah.
whatever it is that you need to do to bring yourself back to that place of balance, because so often our work and our calendar keeps us in this high frenzy state. And we've talked about stress and how important it is to counter stress. Recharging is that way you allow people the space to counter the stress that they've been in. Sometimes the stressful situations last for weeks, but the human body was not designed to function like that. So you really do have to take time to recharge and refresh. And it's so super critical in order for you to be more productive. You have to have those times where you sit down and relax. And if you don't, your body will do it for you because it's just designed that way. There's only so much stress that the body can handle before you start to break down, where you get a cold or you start to get sick or you start to get that brain fog. All of those are just symptoms that you need to take some time to recharge.
Yeah. How many people wander around in the fog of work? It's terrible.
Mhm. Yeah,
And lastly, it's this notion of what are the things in the work environment that can get in the way of you being comfortable to really engage in work? So many people have bad seating. It's not
mhm,
your desk wasn't set up right. They're in environments where they may have bad lighting. Maybe there's a huge amount of noise and distraction around them. And by the way, no noise like a library is very bad. You can't get into a state of flow because then a pin dropping will pull you out of it. So they studied it was 72 decibels was the right amount of background noise, but you need some noise, just the right amount. You need the right temperature. All of these things should be optimized. And as a leader, you should have your workers really think about this. And all of these things matter and they're very important because ultimately it's productivity.
that's right. The last thing you need is for people to be in a stressful situation because of their desk setup, or they're too cold, or they're too hot. That's
Oh, yeah.
also the similar situation where it's cumbersome. It's another thing for the brain to be focused on instead of being focused on the work.
I remember working at 2 Broadway in Manhattan. There were parts of that floor that were just cold. The ventilation systems were not set up properly. And people sitting in those areas were always just cold. And it really does get in the way. Now, remember, Terry and I are giving you norms. We're not just telling you what you need to do. These are norms. And so these catchy phrases, comfort drives performance, are things you can use to make these stick. And you can turn these norms into kind of questions for people to reflect on and have the team rate how well you're doing in these areas. Have a dialogue, talk about it. This is a tool. It's all built, it's turnkey. You can use it. I mean, these are very, very valuable if you're a leader to be able to dig into this. And if you get really interested, you can go look up the science yourself. It's all out there. But this stuff is well documented. And so next week, we're moving on to wellness, which is another thing to encourage people to get high levels of wellness so they're primed to perform. I always did much better after I went to the gym. And we did a show on this, Tara, where we looked at
Yeah.
the impact of exercise on memory recall, creativity, all the things. You can go back and look at that episode. We went through a lot of cognitive neuroscience in different episodes. But you can find all of our recordings at the People Productive channel on YouTube. You can find them at the People Productive on LinkedIn. But this is another very important episode, something people don't think about. You want everybody fully charged and ready to go. And we're going to talk about how do you do that next week. So we'll see you next Wednesday at 3. Hope you could join us. Take care.
Yes. Bye.